Fresh Classic Anniversary realms have just come out to an amazing launch. There were no queues to get in the game. I mean, there were queues in the game for each mob in starter zones, but that's just how Fresh Vanilla goes. And there's so many people on each of the 3 server types. Today I wanted to make a video looking ahead a little bit though about potential issues which could crop up in the future and that do tend to crop up on Fresh Vanilla releases, because I've seen a few of them happen by now. These will be some new things Blizzard have added and some old things which tend to exist in Vanilla, which I think will be worth considering for Blizzard, because these servers are going to be different from anything we've seen before due to having such a higher volume of players on each server, dual specialization and everything else. So with that said, I think that these are 5 problems with Fresh servers which Blizzard really must consider for the future and perhaps maybe act on this time around. But first, a quick word from today's sponsor, HelloFresh. HelloFresh is a meal kit delivery service that sends you all the ingredients you need to make delicious home-cooked meals right to your own kitchen. Life can definitely get busy around this time of the year, but HelloFresh can give you the peace of mind that you don't need to worry about what to eat. HelloFresh keeps your options interesting by offering their largest menu ever with over 50 dinner options, and even more market items that support a healthy lifestyle. You can pick and choose depending on how you want to eat too. Maybe you want more vegetarian, calorie smart, more protein, whatever it is, HelloFresh will be able to provide you with the choices that you need. And what I like about this is not only can it get you on track to eating better in general, but it's also helping to level up your real life cooking skills, so why not give them a try? You can click the link in the description and use my code and get 10 free meals and a free breakfast for life, which means 1 breakfast item per box whilst your subscription is active if you're in the US. Outside of the US, the local discount will still apply. Many thanks to HelloFresh for the sponsor today. Let's get back to WoW. We'll start off with a new addition, Dual Specialization. So Dual Spec is one of the biggest and most unexpected announcements to come with classic Fresh servers, and it seems to have been overwhelmingly positively received so far as well. We have never seen Vanilla with Dual Spec either, or TBC in 12 months for that matter either. It's worth talking about exactly what will Dual Spec mean and how and when it will be implemented into the game. When Blizzard announced this feature, they said Dual Spec will be enabled at a later date. But the thing is, Blizzard have already enabled Dual Spec on Vanilla servers before, in Season of Discovery that is. In this version of World of Warcraft, there's a new dwarf NPC, Grendag Brightbeard, who was added into Stormwind and Orgrimmar during Phase 3 of SOD when the level cap was 40. It was simply the case you walk up to him, hand him 50 gold, and then Dual Specialization would be unlocked. From there on, you could change between different specs as often as you wanted, wherever, whenever, with only the usual Dual Spec restrictions in place, such as it resetting your resources, you can't do it in combat, and so on. And to be honest, I'm not expecting Blizzard to implement Dual Spec in a way that's different from this. I think the questions regarding Dual Spec for Classic at the moment are more, well, there's 3 different things. One is the cost. Things cost gold and are worked towards in a typical Vanilla setting. Dual Spec is a massive permanent character upgrade, so should it be treated as such, or just a new piece of progression that you get for fairly cheap? The second thing is, what level should you get it at? Should you get it at level 40 alongside your mount, or should it be something more towards the end game at 60? Cost, of course, will play into this, especially for your first character. You aren't going to have hundreds of extra gold to throw at this. And third, and perhaps biggest of all, is the function of Dual Spec. Will it just be how it is typically, where you can swap anywhere, anytime? Should you have to go back to your trainer, or perhaps just do a rested zone in order to swap? The concept of planning your bags and gear and setup before going out in the world to do whatever you want to do is very in line with how things typically are in Vanilla. I think for me, if I had to choose, I'd go for more of a late game unlock, reasonably expensive, as in less than an epic mount but more than a regular mount, and it's something you'd be able to swap at any rested zone. The reasoning for me here is when leveling, gear is honestly a big determining factor in doing different roles in dungeons. You can heal or tank fine without a perfect spec, it's not really a big deal. Your spec is much more impactful at endgame, it will be something to work towards gold-wise, and swapping in a rested area specifically just feels as though it fits in with the world of Vanilla a bit better than swapping anytime, anywhere. That's just my opinion. The whole idea with this video is to see what you think as well, so let me know below. I'm sure the devs are listening. Next up, I want to talk about everyone's favourite herb, the Black Lotus. The reason I'm bringing it up is because of how big our realm sizes will be nowadays. Back on WoW's 2019 release, one of the issues that I remember cropping up was the difficulty of finding Black Lotus out in the world, and as a consequence, the costs of flasks in WoW Classic. Back then we did have layering too, of course, it just wasn't as sophisticated as it is now. The demand was just so high that it was hard to even find a single one. Flasks back then would cost hundreds of gold, which in a vanilla setting is kind of ridiculous. This made the burden of farming gold heavier than it already was. In fact, Black Lotus used to work where out of the 4 possible zones where they could spawn, those being Winterspring, Eastern Plagueland, Silithus and the Burning Steppes, there would only be one up in each of these individual zones at any given time. This made competition to lock them down extreme. There were groups that would roam these zones and hold them down on PvP servers, hunters spamming Eagle Eye on spawn locations, and even level 1 bots that would die next to Lotus spawns so people could track them in real time. It was crazy. And as much as it sounds in theme with vanilla to get this degenerate about something, it did have a negative impact because flasks were just so expensive. In time, Blizzard would add a bunch more spawn locations into each zone and allow more than 1 Lotus to spawn per zone too. But nowadays we have these mega servers where I bet it's possible to fit tens of thousands of people on a single realm at the same time. So even with the increased volume of layers, will it be enough to ensure that we don't run into another scenario where Black Lotus or something which are impossible to get for the average person? I mean, on 2019 Classic released, I had a character that was Herbalism and I only ever saw one which was on the way to a raid, and of course somebody else got it immediately. I didn't keep Herbalism for the whole game, that's for sure. Overall, there just needs to be enough available Black Lotus spawning to support the size of these servers. Scarcity of this resource is of course also important, but just not to the extent of what it used to be. Next up is everyone's favorite topic in vanilla, world buffs. So with it being a fresh server, I can tell you they are most definitely here to stay for raiding and whatever other activities you use them for. We'll also have the Chronoboon Displacer from the get-go, so you'll be more easily able to assemble your buffs and to keep them safe until you need them. Moreover, this promotes things such as not having to raid a log and being able to make the most of dual spec between raid times for PvPing or farming or whatever else. All this is great, but there are a few things I want to bring up here about world buffs and about the Chronoboon as well. First is that Diamond Tribute buffs are typically dispellable in a vanilla setting. This was changed in Season of Discovery at some point, so this can no longer happen, and I think that was overall a sensible change. Back in original Classic, people would have low-level characters just to try and grief world buffs via dispelling, which in of itself is a very sad commentary on some of the state of PvP back then. Now with the Chronoboon, realistically this shouldn't happen anymore, but having them dispellable doesn't really have any benefits beyond #no changes, and where's that gone over the years anyway? Also, Garen Molten Core can randomly still grief you if he feels like it. Yes, we do have no buff cap nowadays, so you could load yourself up with magical effects, but it's still RNG. Second thing is resetting Oni and Nefarian buffs. So typically in Classic, when you hand in either the Nef or Oni head, there is a 6-hour window until you can hand another in, and the Rallying Cry of the Dragon Slayer buff goes out when you hand in the quest, of course, which means sometimes you go to hand in the quest or you want to drop a buff for your guild and it's on cooldown so you can't do it, and sometimes you'll need to wait hours and hours. But we have a solution. What people would do is have an opposite faction priest come and mind control the NPC that gives the quest so your faction could kill them. They would then respawn 5 minutes later and you could hand in a new quest and get a new buff dropped. This is a creative bit of gameplay to get around the cooldown, and I very much doubt it was ever intended. Same comment for Warchief's Blessing and a cooldown, except you can't really just go and kill Thrall, can you? Thirdly, there is an invisible 4-hour cooldown on getting a Dark Moon Fair buff, which can be circumvented by logging off in a rested area for 8 hours, but it would be good if it just counted down anyways instead of you needing to do this. And finally is regarding the Chronoboon and just asking whether it's possible to make it a bit more user-friendly. For example, if you have a Rallying Cry of the Dragon Slayer buff with 35 minutes left and a new one is dropping, you have to unboon, get the new one, and then reboon again. Is it possible upon receiving a new buff with a longer duration that it can be automatically added to refresh your current booned buff to its maximum duration? In other words, you have a buff booned, new one drops, you get the updated buff without needing to unboon reboon. And the same could go for some other buffs which can easily be refreshed when you're just AFKing, such as the Spirit of Zandalar eventually or Warchief's Blessing. World buffs and their place for raiding in vanilla is very much emergent gameplay that the old devs didn't intend to be used in such a way. Maybe all these little quirks in how you're meant to get and maintain world buffs is part of the friction present in vanilla, or maybe they're just minor annoyances which were never predicted to exist. Next up, I have what I can only say will be the inevitable PvP PvP queues which will occur sometime after Phase 2 and Battlegrounds becoming available. So the PvP pool for fresh servers, and I'm very much just assuming here, will only be for the PvE and PvP realms which are present. I don't think there'll be any crossover with existing servers such as the PvP pool from Classic Era, as people there could enter Battlegrounds with Nax, Biss and so on. It just wouldn't be fair. What happened on Classic's 2019 release is the PvP pool was also region-wide, and unsurprisingly, as it always seems to happen, a lot more people went Horde for PvP, whether it was due to their racials which are deemed better, your preference, whether you played it back in the day, whatever it may be. And sometime after Phase 2 and Battlegrounds released, Horde ended up with extremely long average wait time for Battlegrounds. Warsong Gulch and Arathi Basin would be some 20 to 30 minutes, and Alterac Valley, no exaggeration, could be 1 to 2 hours. The classic version of Alterac Valley was also found to be, well, let's just say not terribly well balanced. I did a video about it during Classic, really going over some of the issues such as spawn points, starting locations, different choke points which are difficult to hold down or get through, and the various other issues which it had. People back then would also organise pre-mades into AV through several different methods, and if Alliance were successful in pre-mading, they would often win in about 4 to 6 minutes. But as the pre-mades and organisation dried up, it was solo players on the Alliance versus those on the Horde, and the Alliance started to lose more and more, and as soon as people were done with AV, they did not want to run down that valley anymore to Drekthar. Blizzard did try to combat pre-mading on the Alliance side into AV through several different methods, and I think people were still able to find ways to make it work. We're going to have to see what happens here in Phase 2 because I'm not 100% sure on this. Just to give you an example of what AV looked like for Alliance and why people instantly quit it the moment they were done, here is a screenshot I took of my Hunter during their ranking. AV, 172 losses, 7 wins, a staggering 4% win rate. And honestly, in this scenario, there's no winner here either. The Alliance nearly always lose, and the Horde have to sit in queues for hours to get an auto-win Alterac Valley. Eventually, the queues got so long on Horde side that Blizzard enabled cross-faction Battlegrounds to solve this. On top of that, they even gave Alliance loot boxes for queuing into Battlegrounds, and people still weren't queuing more than they needed to. But by that time, the damage had been done. So any change to anything which I've just mentioned would deviate in a big way from original vanilla, but I don't see why history won't repeat itself here, and historically, I don't think that this was a very good experience. All in all, I love a scenario where PvP is for PvPers, you can just press queue up and you've got a battleground in about the space of 5 minutes with a reasonable chance of winning on both sides. Speaking of reasonable chance of winning, pre-mading. On our fresh servers these days, we're going to have such a big potential pool of PvP players. It's not going to compare to the 2019 release, that was crazy big, but it will be a lot of people. And if people are queuing into Battlegrounds and getting absolutely stomped, they are not going to stick around. A big reason why we're going to have so many more people interested in PvP these days is because of dual specialization. You don't have to feel as though you're wasting gold to participate in PvP anymore, so Blizzard really have a chance to do something here. I just want to go back to that screenshot from my Hunter again and check the other Battlegrounds. Warsong Gulch, 33 wins, 90 losses. Arathi Basin, 21 wins, 69 losses. This was all done solo, by the way, to experiment how exactly the experience was. And the experience was, when you run to a pre-made, go next. When you got the Battlegrounds between teams who were just solo players, or there was a couple people matched up on each side, there'd be a lot of back and forth, and it felt as though there was an actual game to play. But when you got a pre-made, it was, oh, just die and don't release at the graveyard and wait for them to win. It wasn't fun. And obviously people are going to say, well, just join a pre-made yourself, but that's not really the point. The point is the expectation to win or lose is just so drastically off where it needs to be in classic PvP. Take League of Legends, for example, and yes, League has a lot more games being played, I'm not going to argue with that, but say if a champion is new and they've just come out and they have a 55% win rate, that is crazy broken. They're going to be pick or ban until they are changed. Consequently, if something drops to a 45% win rate, it's absolutely terrible, like it needs a rework or buffs or something, and we're talking about a 5% leeway here between something being terrible and overpowered. You can see from the numbers on my Hunter, I'm about a 30% win rate queuing up solo. 30%. On the other hand, if I joined a pre-made, I'd probably have an 80% plus win rate. That's a swing of a 50% win rate. Obviously, pre-mading will confer a pretty big advantage, but if I queue in solo, I know I've got about a 30% win rate, whereas if I queue in a pre-made, I might have an 80% win rate. It's just too much of a difference between the two numbers. I don't know of another game with a PvP format where you can say with such a good degree of certainty whether you expect to win or lose before the game starts. starts. And I think that comment goes for classic PvP battlegrounds in general. The issue of pre-made versus solo has happened in every single version of Fresh Vanilla I've seen so far as well. It happened at the start of Season of Discovery in Phase 2 as well, and Blizzard actually changed it back then. They made a change which said, players in groups of 5 or fewer, you will have a higher chance to match against groups of 5 or fewer. Likewise, if you're in a group of 6 or more, you will have a higher chance to match with groups of 6 or more. This will aid in matching more pre-made groups with pre-made groups, and non-pre-mades with non-pre-mades when possible. There were a lot of complaints about pre-mades at the start of SOD, believe me, and after this, they pretty much disappeared straight away, which suggests to me that this worked to some extent. They did bring pre-mades back more recently in Season of Discovery to lower queue times, but to be honest, I think most people with SOD and PvP, I don't think they're sticking around for it too much, so that's kind of its own problem at the same time. Either way, Fresh will have a lot of interest for PvP with dual specialization, but the question of whether pre-mades will once again be able to run rampant is yet to be answered. So Blizzard, what's it gonna be here? What do you think? Should they leave it as it is, or were the changes in Season of Discovery good? And that's it, 5 things, some old, some new, which I think have a potential to become problematic on this vanilla Fresh. Do you want to see updates to any of the areas I've mentioned today? And I know when you talk about change, people will always ask for more change. That's how people work. But that's where the developers need to step in and make a call. Are these things okay as they are, or should they be changed somewhat? A lot of things have happened in Classic over the years due to community feedback. I'm sure the devs are listening. If you think any of these things are worth talking about, definitely drop a comment. And as always, thank you all so much for watching and listening in, and I shall see you all in the next one very soon.